Great. Okay. Okay, so welcome to the Artist Equity Speaker Series. My name is Karen Cappy Nugent. And before we get started, I'd like to thank my co-chair, Betsy Maraglia, for her help with planning and developing the series, Bo Dernbach for sending the emails and managing the postings to help get the word out about the series, and the AE board for sponsoring this series, and the president of AE, Robin Stone. The presentation will be about 35 to 40 minutes, and at the end, there'll be a Q&A period, and we'll ask you to type your questions into the chat. So with that, I am delighted to introduce fine artist Ellen Priest, who will share her experience purchasing real estate for a studio. This was to help fulfill her dream of having a large studio, home office, and living areas. Ellen will also touch upon her process for developing a body of work for a solo show. So Ellen, welcome. I want to pin you. There we are. Welcome. Yes, you're now pinned.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Betsy reached out a couple months ago and asked me if I would talk about this. And I thought, who's interested in this? And she said, no, we're interested. I said, okay. So I am an abstract painter. My work is all based on jazz. You can see my work. I'm not going to talk much about my work itself in this presentation. You can see my work at ellenpriest.com. And each series of my paintings is based on one jazz composition or suite of compositions. And so each of my projects is 2 to 5 years. So in my mid-40s, which was a few weeks ago, I was on my own by choice. And I said, okay, I have never had an opportunity to really push my artwork and put it in the center of my life and make that the organizing principle of all of my decisions, professional decisions. And I said, I really need to do that. A lot of people do that when they're young. I didn't have that opportunity for a variety of reasons. And it's like, what do I want to make sure I do before I hit 60 or 70 and look back and say, oh my God, I wish I had done X. So I decided to do that. It was a pretty insurmountable task at that point, but somehow one finds a way. And I had figured out over a period of years, looking at tax laws and looking at the way artists live that I knew, just looking at a great deal of information, both information that I read and just my experience seeing artists living and working who were able to really work. And what I realized was that the best way, the most cost-effective way for me to own a place was to own a live-work house. And that's not the normal structure. People sometimes buy into condominium studios, let's say in the Northern Liberties, in Philly when it was first developing. And I knew I had an industrial studio in New Haven, Connecticut for many years. It was about 1,000 square feet. It was in the old A.C. Gilbert American Flyer train factory. And I realized that I would not have liked being in an industrial loft overnight. That was just not something I was comfortable with. I also am a person, I grew up in northern Minnesota, and I need some outdoor space, even if it's tiny. I need to be able to be outside on a regular basis. So at that time, I was living in Cape May, New Jersey for health reasons. I had some serious upper respiratory problems. And I said, all right, I'm going to look. And Philly was my working city and PMA was my working museum. It still is. And so I said, all right, what's within a 2-hour radius of Cape May that includes Philly that I can afford? And I started, this was early 2000s. I started looking at real estate and my budget was very low. and banks were not lining up to give me a mortgage as a, a sole proprietor, artist, self-employed, all that stuff. So I just was very realistic about it. And actually, the coincidence is that Betsy Moraglia's husband, Julian, was directed me to a vice president at Susquehanna Bank. And she advised me that I would qualify for a CRA loan, which is a Community Reinvestment Act loan. And it's for low to moderate income families. And I was a family of one, and who qualified. It took me about 2 years to qualify. And meanwhile, I was looking around. And I looked at houses all over the area. I didn't look in Camden, in Collingswood. I looked online. I actually looked in Camden. I looked in various parts of Philadelphia. I had lived briefly in Philadelphia for a little bit. And I looked, just anything that seemed to be interesting and reasonable and doable. And a corporate dealer of mine said, Ellen, you need to look at Wilmington, because she had been going through this with another artist friend, and she was from Baltimore. And she said, you need to look at Wilmington. I said, Wilmington? And she said, Ellen, just, stop, meet me there, because I had to pick up a painting from her. And she was working with a corporate client here in Wilmington. And she said, the light is beautiful, and you're not going to believe it until you see it. And I said, okay. So I met her here and in Wilmington, Delaware. And I realized this was a crummy, awful 90-degree polluted day in August. And the light, in fact, in the buildings that she took me into, where she was, doing art in the hallways and lobbies and whatnot, was downtown on the hill, and the light was gorgeous. And I thought, what is this about? Why is this? And I went and I realized that Wilmington is on a hill, it's a port city, and there's a tremendous amount of reflected light up from the river. Even though I can't see the river directly from my house, I get the benefit of all that reflected light. And I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, which is a city on a hill overlooking Lake Superior. So I grew up in a port city with a tremendous amount of reflected light. So short of the long of it is that if one is going to make a change to a city one doesn't know, there has to be a way in, because otherwise it's just too big a leap. I wasn't going to be that far from friends and museums and everything that I was comfortable with. But so I had a dealer here who was interested in my work. We talked. Delaware doesn't buy a lot of abstraction, so he was never able to sell my work, even though he loved it. But he knew the neighborhoods, and he directed me and introduced me to some people. Turns out the neighborhood I'm in was one that had a very strong neighborhood association, which is a critical piece if you're moving to someplace you don't know. And it also had a lot of people this was a borderline neighborhood when I moved here. Betsy will remember, I'm sure. And my house is on a corner that I looked at several houses in the neighborhood, but the house I eventually purchased is on a street that literally was the border at that time between where the prices stabilized on the lower end and where 2 blocks or like half a block from me, the prices were almost double mine. So I knew that this was the next piece that was going to come up. And that's very important if you're moving into an area that is, let's say, transitional. So I also was looking in a very particular way for a house that I could live in right away, but that needed enough work that it was not going to be at its optimal price, but it had to be work that I could handle doing. So there are all these different factors to it that have to be balanced. I knew that I needed about 2,000 square feet. And I knew that I needed 1,500 to work in and about 500 to live in. So this house is roughly 2,000 square feet. And I knew that it had to be someplace that was beautiful to me in some way, because I was going to be both living and working there. So the bones of this house are just great, even if it needs a lot of work inside still. The bones of it are beautiful. The proportions are great. The ceilings are very high, which gives me a lot of reflected light for my work, because I make all of my color decisions in daylight. And all of my windows, the windows on the first 2 floors, it's a 3-story house. The windows on the first floor are, at first and second floors, are 6 feet. So I've got 6 feet of glass positioned all along the front and the side and the back of the house, facing northeast. So I have a tremendous amount of north light. So this all fell into place. I think the thing that pushed me to really looking to buy as opposed to rent is not only the financial aspect of it, but I had read in 2003, shortly after it came out, a report from the Urban Institute. And I put the link to that report in the chat before we started. And it's a report called Investing in Creativity, something like support structures for artists in the United States. And several major foundations, like Rockefeller, Ford, Rasmussen, had commissioned the Urban Institute to look at how artists survive. What do they make? Do they have healthcare? Do they have unemployment? How do they make it? And do people value the arts? And do people value the artists? And what they found, and my percentages are going to be off here, but not by much. What they found was several really startling things. And they did a nationwide study interviewing, hundreds of people, that something like 87% of people value the arts, and less than 30% value the artists. They think that we do what we do for fun, because we're narcissistic, because we love it. And they don't think about the fact that just because I love what I do doesn't mean I don't need to put a roof over my head or feed my kids or drive a car. So, and artists have the lowest incomes for our educational level as a professional group. We also were less likely, this was before Obama and the Affordable Care Act, but we're much less likely to have health insurance, much less likely to have any kind of adequate financial cushion. So again, especially for our educational level and for the value of the arts in the overall economy. And Americans for the Arts has been fabulous in the last 15 years at working with the divisions of the arts, departments of the arts, whatever, in states across the country to document the quantity of economic activity that's generated by the arts. So that can be a theater, its employees, the activity they generate, the real estate value of the building that the theater is in. It's every tentacle that goes out into the economy. And the economic activity, you can, on Americans for the Arts, I'm pretty sure you can find that. I know in Delaware, I can get it on the Delaware Division of the Arts website for here. And there was also a study done for the Philadelphia region as a region. And it was just staggering, the amount of money that the arts, the amount of economic activity that the arts do generate. For example, restaurants and, all that kind of stuff, hotels. So the Urban Institute report gave me a push, because I realized that if I didn't go to bat for me and for my work, nobody was going to. And in a way, why should they? So that was where, I just pulled my grit together and said, all right, I'm just going to do this. And it has, in fact, worked out very well. if I were doing this and I were, back in my mid 40s again, I mean, I love the East Coast and I love I'm pretty much equidistant between the Museum of Modern Art and the National Gallery in Washington. So it's an ideal location. But if I were more flexible geographically, I would look around the country at surprising places. And I don't know if anybody younger is listening to this or will listen to the recording, but I think it's really important to be open to the fact that hubs for the arts are changing. And they're changing dramatically, partly because nobody can afford to be in Brooklyn or even in Long Island City anymore, or Hoboken or wherever. So I've been reading, for example, about Detroit. And Detroit is a perfect example of a city that's had an economic depression, but that has a major museum with a wonderful collection and a thriving art scene. And there have been many transplants from New York to Detroit. I read several years ago about a whole collective of, I think, 18 artists that moved from one of the boroughs in New York, lock, stock, and barrel to Detroit. Because in Detroit, they could get ample real estate for what they could afford, and they were free to do their work. And with everyone on the internet anyway, and people able to travel, they weren't hurting themselves by being in Detroit. A few years ago, more than it could be 10 years ago at this point. But the Detroit Institute of Arts is a fabulous museum, and it's actually owned by the city, I believe, but the collection is owned by the city. And they made a decision in the midst of their financial hardship not to deaccession the collection, that belonged to the people of Detroit, and it was a major cultural asset, and they weren't going to let it go. Well, when a city makes that kind of a decision, that says a lot about the value of the arts. So anyway, if anyone is thinking of a move, I would say be really open-minded. There may be states in the West, for example, Denver. Certainly if I were looking now and I weren't, accustomed to, I couldn't live in Minnesota cold anymore, but I'm not sure I could live in New Orleans heat, but I would really gravitate to New Orleans, given my orientation to jazz and music. And New Orleans is a very, very vital art scene at this point, with some good museums. So the things that I had to take into consideration, and this group may or may not be relevant in your thinking at all, but perhaps if you talk to people who are at a stage of moving or younger people, I had to consider a lot of very interesting financial perspectives. For example, I had to look at a whole variety of mortgage options that I didn't really understand or know about. And the CRA loan was suggested to me because as someone who was now a one-person family, I was a first-time buyer. And for their purposes, a first-time buyer can be someone divorced who hasn't owned property solo prior to that. And it is a lower interest, no mortgage insurance mortgage option for low and middle income families. I also had to look at tax structures. And the difference, when I was looking in Philadelphia, my accountant up in Connecticut, I still use an accountant that I've used forever. And he said, Ellen, if you move to Philadelphia, I'm not doing your taxes anymore. I refuse. I'm going to get too angry. And I said, really? And so I looked very carefully, and it's not just the obvious things like the property taxes, for example, are very important if you're owning a house, school taxes, things like that. But it was also the business taxes and the structure of the business taxes, because in Philadelphia at that time, I don't know if this is still true, but mid 2000s, early 2000s, I would have had to pay a gross receipts tax, meaning even if I went in the hole for the year with my business, I would pay a very small percentage on my gross receipts. It's not net, it's gross. Then you pay another percentage on your net receipts. So I said, wait a minute, that's not going to work. That's just not going to work for me. There's also a question of, what are the level of personal income taxes, and between federal, city, and state, what's the structure of the taxes? How do they interface? And here in Delaware, because for businesses, this is one of the Panamas of the US, they derive a lot of their tax income from businesses and a lot of loopholes and whatnot. The way that affects someone like me is that my business taxes are very low. I pay the city a very small business tax per year on my net receipts. I pay the state no business taxes. In my category, I wouldn't pay business taxes until I made something like $247,000 a quarter. And at that point, fine, I'm happy to pay the taxes. So you have to look at the tax structure at every level because it all matters. And the thing is, as an artist, for many of us, there's not a lot of leeway. So there's no room for expensive mistakes that we're now stuck with paying every single year. Another issue was another completely separate category is getting to know the neighborhoods. And I mentioned this before, but a strong neighborhood association makes a huge difference if you're in a transitional kind of neighborhood. And there was a lot of crime here when I first moved here. And it's a good thing I didn't visit at night, or I probably wouldn't have had the guts to do it. I would not have bought in a neighborhood like this if I were raising a child. But that said, within about 3 or 4 years of the time I got here, a number of younger families started moving in, and that has really changed the landscape. So, and they're very active. There's a huge movement to improve the parks and the activities going on in the parks. And that all really has, using parks as kind of urban living rooms. And that's all had a tremendous effect. The neighborhood is very different now, 15 years later, than it was the first few years I lived here. So that all figures in. And obviously, if you're raising children or starting a family, the schools matter. Because even if you get a great deal on a mortgage and a wonderful piece of property, if school is priced out of your range because the city schools are not good enough, then that becomes an expense that could offset what you've gained. So what I decided when I was looking for a house with my square footage issues was that I wanted something where I could use maybe the whole first floor as studio, and then other like office upstairs. My gluing room is on the 3rd floor because iron storage is on the 3rd floor. My gluing process has been one where the material I've used, I'm in the middle of changing my process for other reasons, but my glue was toxic, highly toxic. It's the substance that Morris Louis used pouring those paintings, and that he developed brain cancer before he was 50. So I'm very careful of it. So I had a room on the 3rd floor, and I'll show it to you, that had no access to the heating system and had cross ventilation because there were 2 windows in it. So that was perfect. And when I looked at the house, as I looked through, I realized that there were all the pieces that I needed. And that made a huge difference. And it took some serious looking at a number of places before I found this, but I could see that this would work. So let's see, how are we on time? Karen, I think I'm going to share my screen and show you my house at this point.
That sounds great.
Okay, so, and if I get this wrong, help me out. Oh, you know what I did? I want this. Okay. Okay. So this is, can you all see that now? Okay. This is what my house looked like when I bought it. And this is, I'd been here a couple of years at the time of this photograph. So the pots were ones that I put there to make it look like someone lived here. This is the side of the house. And you can see from this side view, the first floor, I use everything in the main part of the house back to that addition. And the addition is a kitchen, and this is 1890s. The kitchen, I'm guessing, was added on maybe in the 20s. That's the kind of construction, along with the garage. So the whole first floor is studio space. The kitchen I use for both. The front of the second floor is my office. And then the rest of it is bedroom, bathrooms, and upstairs is storage and gluing. This is when we were putting a roof back onto the garage. It had fallen in. So when I got this place, everything was solid, but it really looked awful. And that's why I got it for what I did. This is the walkway from the back of the house behind the garage, and you can see the fence there, and it goes to a terrace out behind. And this is all pre-renovation. So now this is all gardened in, and I grill back there and all the rest of it. This is the house now. It's the house on the right. The house on the left, just a couple months ago, it was bought from a longtime slumlord by a family business that's renovating and flipping houses. So it has a new life, and that's given my house a new life. There's my porch, and you can see the difference between the old porch and the new porch. All the same structure, but with different cosmetics, and I had the railings rebuilt and all that. And again, here's the side of the house now. Different view of the side. And this is my studio. This is the middle room on the first floor. I used to make that my kind of sitting and figuring things out room, and my big work table was in the front. I've now moved that. But on the right, you can see the what should be the dining room. And I use that for letting work dry and just overflow and whatnot. This is that middle room again, and you can see those are my brush studies on the floor. I develop a language by making brush studies like less than a minute, and then that language is what I trace and transfer to get the final work. This is now my viewing room. This is the front room of the first floor. And my big work table is now in the middle room. And here I'm painting a brush study on my work table in the middle room, and you can see the front room behind it. I hope all that makes sense. This is my gluing room up on the third floor. The process that I've used for many years, I have to spot glue and weight it down for about a week for the glue to set. So I figured out a way to do it up on the third floor there. And just for fun, this is my palette. And with the Urban Institute report in mind, one of the things they said very strongly was that too many careers of younger artists in all disciplines never develop for lack of studio space. And that hit me very hard. And I've mentioned that to a number of younger artists. Is go to bat for your own work and for a place to work. Because unless you have wealthy parents, too many young artists never have a chance to develop. And what might they have been? Who might they have been? What work might they have turned out? So I show this at the end. This is my show at the Delaware Contemporary. This is what my house has allowed me to do. Without this house, I don't know that I would have been able to do this, either financially or in terms of workspace. I guess this might be a good segue. I want to mention a couple more things about looking for a place and things that are important. I'll go very quickly. And then Karen and Betsy had asked me to talk a little bit about how to put together an exhibition. So just laundry list about finding a house, buying a house. Zoning is very important. I'm in a zoning area that allows an in-home business. So I am able completely legally to take 60% of all of my expenses on the house as business expenses because I use 60% of the space. So I can take 60% of my mortgage interest, my insurance, my all of my utilities, any maintenance and repairs. I've had to replace both furnaces and my water heater in the last 4 years. I'm now doing some structural work on the foundation. All of that over time will be 60% deductible. Another issue is, so zoning is really critical. You can have a studio in your home, but you can't really invite anyone in to look at work or do anything professional in the house. Now, I can't hang out a shingle, but I don't want to hang out a shingle. So I could if I went through a zoning variance, and people do have signs, but that's not what I want. Another issue is insurance. I'm able on my homeowners to, because I have an in-home business, I'm able to attach my business insurance to my homeowners, making it extremely reasonable. So I have business liability insurance that covers, I don't know what the max is, but it's very high for $165 a year because it's part of my homeowner's insurance. Another issue is looking at a building. It's very important to get consultants in. In my case, it was an architect, building construction manager I knew. And I paid him to evaluate each of the houses that I was actually serious about, because I knew that I didn't know enough about structural issues and plumbing and electric and all that stuff. So I made sure I had someone who was an expert to advise me, and that's really critical. So Betsy and Karen asked me to talk a little bit about putting together an exhibition. That's apparently an issue that's come up for a lot of people. And I would just, I guess my own take, I have an easy time of it because I work in large series. Generally, my exhibitions are primarily, if not exclusively, one series. Maybe with, if the series is all large work, I may sprinkle in some smaller work from one or two other series. But it's really important for an exhibition to have coherence and to make a unified statement of some sort. And that's my view on it. I'm not as interested in exhibitions that span too many years of someone's work, and I can't really see their train of thought. So that's really and also I would say framing is absolutely critical. Framing is part of that the framing has to have a certain integrity and continuity. So Karen, would you like to, now I stopped sharing, did that work?
It did. So perfect. And we're
See if there are any questions. And
yeah, if there's any questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat. We don't have any questions yet. You mentioned, coherence for a show, and in our earlier meeting, you mentioned rigor. Do you want to talk about, can you talk about that a little bit and what you might mean when you say, there has to be some rigor involved?
Yeah, I think it's hard to talk about that. I think it's a question of choosing what you feel is your best work and not worrying about having a show be smaller if it's higher quality. It's also about not overhanging a show with too much work that's not really up to snuff. You just, I'd much rather see a small show that's just super and really tells me something and asks me questions and asks me to observe things in a different way. And that the rigor comment is not a comment about subject matter at all. It can be anything. It can be pictures of your kids and your grandkids. It can be, the subject matter can be anything if the compositional structure is strong, the color is strong, if it really, as I say, asks me to look in a different way.
Mm, okay. And I know we talked a little bit about funding, and could you talk about funding and how you managed to do these shows and work for 5 years for a show?
Oh,
And
sure.
yeah.
I
Mhm.
well, I we all have gigs that support us. And for me, it's always been a teaching gig, or mostly it's been teaching gigs, but mine have always basically been part-time. And in the early 90s, I started to work on a studio art program for kids that's called Eyeball It. And originally, I envisioned that as a for-profit product, and I had a pending endorsement in the late 90s from the Museum of Modern Art retail wing. And we just were not able to pull all the pieces together. They couldn't afford to produce it. And we pulled in a third partner and it just didn't work. So all of the content went back into boxes. Momo was still interested, but we just couldn't make the nuts and bolts of it work. So it all went back into boxes. The 2000s went by. I knew it was even more needed because art started being cut in the schools in the late 80s, and they were still being cut. And I didn't see how there was any more to cut, but they were still cutting. And so I determined sometime in early 2000s that if I could find a way to get it online and make it free, I was going to do that. Finally, in 2013, I had a little opening. I had two funders who I thought would get behind it. They did, and that's the beginning of Eyeball It online, and it's eyeballitartforkids.org. Let me type there we go.
Okay,
And
great.
so that is how I am supported much more than on my work, as is true for all of us. And it's just I've been able to design my own day job. And so Eyeball It is in use by Boys and Girls Clubs and Summer Learning Collaborative here in Delaware. I just trained some people from the After School Alliance in Philly and Camden. It's meant for parents and kids to do at home. And it dates from the days of the supplements that parents used are, Hooked on Phonics, Math Made Easy. And parents were coming to me and saying, Ellen, they're cutting all the art in school. What do we do? Is there anything we can do at home? And we looked around and there wasn't anything serious. So I thought, okay, I'll write something. So
So,
that was the genesis of it. And so it's being used. I have users from Alaska to Florida and the UK to Australia based on my database. So I don't, we redesigned the website a year ago. Interestingly, it just happened to coincide with the need for COVID era learning. So it's gotten a lot of boost from that. But it's in use reasonably widely given how unknown an endeavor it is. So,
okay, so you had two funders kind of get it off the ground for you, and
and then
now
I've
you're
continued to fundraise, and one of them has
packaging it,
stayed behind it. Yeah.
and they're paying a fee or something to use it. Wonderful.
No, using it is free.
Oh, okay, great. That's even
And
better.
that's
So,
the whole point.
so the
There's
funders are still funding it, funding your
absolutely,
time? Okay.
yeah. And I do that through a fiscally sponsored project at Fractured Atlas in New York. I don't know how many of you know Fractured Atlas. It's an artist services organization. It's a nonprofit, and they fiscally sponsor over 4,000 projects like mine.
Yeah, we are a little bit familiar with fiscal sponsors, and we're working to get that set up through Friends of Artist Equity. Um, we have a question in the chat from John Benigno. Who are your favorite jazz artists?
Well, my favorites and the ones I actually work with overlap, but they're not identical. So the artists I've worked with the most have been Edward Simon and Ryan Cohan, and then two Cuban artists, Arturo Stable and Elio Villafranca. And Elio and Arturo were both based in Philly for a long time. Elio's now in New York. Edward is part of the San Francisco Jazz Collective, which I love, and he actually lives in San Francisco. And then Ryan Cohan is a jazz artist in Chicago. And my latest series was based on a suite that he wrote. What I listen to a lot, I mean, I'm a nut on Chick Corea, and I listen to a lot of Branford Marsalis. I tend to listen to mostly either piano or saxophone led groups. I have a lot of piano. So, and then I listen to a lot of Latin American and African music.
Wow. Okay. Wonderful. How about other questions from folks out there?
I have a question for all of you. I asked Betsy and Karen earlier if they knew the age of the audience that I would be talking to, because artist equity does skew older, and meaning not 25 anymore. And so I'm curious, since you're not making big changes in your own lives at this point, at least from the faces I can see, why were you interested in hearing about this? Karen, you can choose to unmute or you can choose to have people type into the box, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, feel free to type or unmute and then
I'll talk
mention.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be 75 and live in a single family house, my wife and I, and it's a lovely house in a lovely neighborhood. But when we bought this house, I was not involved that much in the arts as an artist. I was involved in arts administration. Over the years, that's, transferred to being now a full-time artist. And the house doesn't suit the space setup of the house doesn't really fit what I need. So I'm constantly in the search.
Yeah.
And
are you actually searching for another place, or are you searching for a way to restructure what you have?
Another place, both really, and I have the advantage of being a real estate agent. So I have access to a lot of information.
Yeah,
but it's still not easy to find something.
no, it's not. And I don't know what your needs are as a photographer, because photography is so different than it used to be. I don't know if you do other art forms, but
no, just photography.
Right. So your need for space is partly a need to be able to hang work so you can see it and really look at it.
No, the need for space for two things. It's storage,
right?
And it's I do mostly landscape photography, so I would like to have a little bit of studio space, but that's not a real necessity. Today everything is done on the computer, but I would like to have a computer studio, I guess is what I would call it, rather than being crowded into this little bedroom that I'm in right now with stuff. You can't see what's all over the floor, thank God.
Well, yeah. No, I get it. So for you, it's finding space that has access to what you like to shoot and the ability to function in your studio.
And most of it is in New Mexico.
Well, good luck with it, because it's not an easy problem to solve.
No,
and
it is not.
One of the things that I like about these older homes, I mean, I love older architecture anyway. I think my neighborhood is so rich walking around. It's just beautiful, 1850 to early 1900s architecture of every kind you can imagine. And for me, the high ceilings are really important because of the reflected light, and because I can see my work is big. And so I can see it in a space that's big enough that I actually understand what's happening spatially. But these older homes are wonderful because, and I've encouraged a number of younger artists to take a look at them, because this neighborhood, for example, is one where after the race riots in '68, there was tremendous white flight. And then after that, a lot of the houses got broken up into apartments. Well, the city has gone to great lengths to make those revert to single family, which is good. And it's rebuilding itself that way. Our neighborhood is a perfect example. But you often have 3 units in a building that now have to be changed back to single family. Well, for an artist, that's perfect. You can take, it may be a 3,000 square foot house. You take 1 floor for your studio and 2 floors become ample living space for a family. You know, there's a house across the street from me that has 7 bedrooms. What are you going to do with 7 bedrooms these days? You know? And so the point is, there is space available for a very reasonable price. And you can, there's no reason that as long as it's a single family living there, you can't break up the space however you want to.
Yeah.
So Ellen, that was a great question, John, and comment.
Good
Thanks
luck
for
with
jumping
that.
in. Yeah. We have a question or a comment in the chat. Bonnie's interested more in the solo show. So let's think about that for a second. You go away, you know, you've made this language, you've created this body of work that's, you know, a presence, you know, compositionally, color. What do you do? Do you start researching before you finish the body of work for a place to show it? How do you think about where that show is going to meet the public?
Well, that's a tough question these days. The whole way of both showing and selling artwork, which are 2 very different things now. It's changing so much because of the internet, and because I think it really started to change fast after the crash in '08. Everything started to shift. And I know artists in, you know, our age and experience range, let's say 50 and over, who say they've never seen it move this fast as it has in the last 15 years. So my personal thing is that I start looking years ahead, because any credible exhibition space books exhibitions 2 to 5 or even more years out. And I would say now it's more like 4 to 6 years out, because now they've got all these exhibitions that they couldn't present during COVID. So they've got artists that they owe exhibitions to. A lot of places did keep exhibiting and figured out ways to present things online, but they extended the exhibitions. I just went on a Zoom Delaware Art Museum members meeting the other night, and they extended 2 exhibitions and they've postponed some a year to 2 years later than they would have been shown. So that changes the whole schedule again. So my own sense is, find a hospitable exhibition space or several, approach them, write to them about your work, go in and see them. In person really matters. And start talking and see what their schedule is and see what, I don't know. This is not a question I can answer easily or competently. And I really mean that. If I had the answer to this, I'd be showing more myself.
Can I add something? You know, also be ready.
Yes.
I mean, I've been fortunate that, you know, I have, like you, I work in projects, and, you know, I have several projects framed, ready to go. And that's worked out for me a number of times where, you know, for whatever reason, a show falls through and you get a call. Hey, John, can you can you step in and you know, fill the space? And no, I can't. Of course I can, but you've got to be ready.
Yeah, with my work, it's not so easy to do that.
Well, photography is a different
Yeah, it's very
For a
different.
completely different format, yes.
Yeah, my framing expenses are so high that I can't, but even so, I mean, I have work that if I had to put up an exhibition 2 weeks from now, I would manage to do it. So it just, you build a body of work, and you have the pieces in place to make it happen. And, I've been fortunate with the jazz connection with my work. And I would wonder if there are other connections that your own work would have. For example, landscape, or portraiture, or whatever. Are there particular kinds of portraits that some particular organization might be interested in exhibiting for whatever reason? Nonprofits of various kinds, many have exhibition spaces. And there are many places that want to show quality work, and they're not known exhibition spaces, so they don't necessarily get lots of applications from people who have strong work. I would just be open and look. I don't know that that's very helpful, but it's the best I can do right now.
There is no formula.
There used to be, and there isn't anymore.
Great. Betsy, did you have a question? I thought I saw you raising your hand.
Yes, I did. I've got several. Ellen, I don't know if Ellen's been to my home now, but I think I may have shot myself in the foot. We downsized, and I'm in a place that I didn't think all the way through. I can't show my work in my home. I don't have spaces where I can really work large in. And so I'm listening to what you're talking about. I don't want to buy a house, but do you think it's feasible for me in my higher mid 70s to rent or purchase a space like in a town like Conshohocken? Which is right across the water here, just so I have a place where I can take the materials after I've worked on the etching press, and I've worked in the paper making and the vats and everything that I have here in a large bedroom that I took a lot of walls and closets out of to make a good sized space. But I can't spread out anywhere and work really large. And I just wondered what your thoughts would be on that.
I don't know. I mean, knowing your work and stuff, and I have been to your current house, your current.
Oh, that's right. You have.
And I have seen your studio, which is beautiful, but it is cramped.
It's tight.
It's not. Somebody else would walk in there and say it's not tiny, but I can see how you could get cramped in there really fast.
Yeah.
I think the thing for me is the hours that I work. I don't have to worry about my safety coming and going from an industrial studio space at night.
I love working at home for that reason. I can get up at 4 o'clock in the morning if I can't sleep and walk right across the hall, and I'm in my studio.
Exactly. Now, whether it makes any sense to split your studio into two places, I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. I would say you have the financial leeway to just look around and see what might be out there. What I would say is that you, like many people with families and, a short place and whatever, you have a lot of responsibilities in a lot of different directions.
Mm-hmm.
So I would really recommend trying to find something that somebody else can take care of for you. So you're not dealing with maintenance on the building,
Right.
It's got to be something where you really are able to walk in the door and work,
Mm-hmm.
and leave. That would be my concern for you, is just too much stuff that was going to end up in the interest of having a place to work, ending up distracting you from your work. And see, that was another reason for my having a live work space,
Mm-hmm.
is that I take care of one place and it's all taken care of.
Yeah.
Well,
that's going on in the condo association, that I don't think about the yard work and all the rest.
Right.
Right behind me is something, it's a 4-foot by 8-foot piece. I mounted the panels up here to throw it in my face to get finished. I
Yeah.
have done all the paper making on it. I just now have to design the collograph plates and do the printing. Each one of these modules it just hangs up on like a French cleat.
Right. So you had trouble.
I can work smaller. That's
Yeah.
the point, to build bigger.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with Mo Brooker several years ago in a critique kind of thing that I did with him. I think 5 or 6 of us were there. And he said, "What's your largest piece?" And I told him, and he said, "Why aren't you working larger?" I
Yeah.
said, "Space." And
Yeah.
I don't know, I have a
Well, that's
limitation
the-
with an etching press, but it's not.
That is the issue, whether you're 25 and starting out with student debt and everything else, or whether you're at the point where you are. And we'll talk more. We'll talk more.
Sorry, I didn't mean,
Tying up
it might
everybody
help
else.
somebody. It
But
might help
it's
someone.
an
I'm working larger.
It's a really important question, is how do you
Yeah.
get the space to work?
Because I
And
have
how do you
tons of
get the
energy.
space to fit your work, which is what John was talking about.
Yes, yeah, no, I understood what he
The
was saying.
space to fit what you're actually doing at this point in your life. So,
With that, I just want to interject that no commute is a beautiful thing. I was told once that 10 minutes a day equals a week of your time in a year. So that's a lot of time to lose if you're traveling back and forth. But I want to thank everybody for coming today. And Ellen, I don't see any additional questions in the chat, and we're at the 5 o'clock hour. Do you have any final word that you'd like to sign off with?
no, just I think my only comment would be just take the chances that you have to take in order to go to bat for your own work.
Perfect ending. So thank you again for coming. I'd like to hand it over to our president, Robin Stone, who might like to say a word.
Thank you. I just want to also thank Betsy and Karen, because you guys have done an amazing job with the speaker series. They're all fantastic and really fascinating. I don't know what we expected coming into this, and I think we all got so much more out, than we could have dreamed. So really appreciate your transparency, Ellen, and sharing with us so much. It's really fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that.
I mean, to me, it's just what I do. So when Betsy said we're interested, it's like, okay.
No, great, thank you.
Well, it was really, really great. So I'm glad everyone's here. Please do sign up for the next 2 series that are on the website, and you'll be getting emails to that effect. So thank you all for coming. It was really great. And Karen and Betsy, thank you so much. You put so much work into this, and it's really been fabulous.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Robin.
Be safe.
Thanks, Ellen.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Ellen. I'll talk soon.
Okay.